Welcome to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast for farmers and ag professionals by the Iowa Farm Bureau, bringing you the news, experts, and educational insights that matter most. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our November 24th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler. This week, we're bringing you our sit-down interview with retiring Iowa State University President Wendy Wintersteen. President Wintersteen's 46-year tenure at ISU has taken her from Extension Field Specialist to faculty member to Dean of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences to the presidency. So we're excited to pick her brain on the standout moments in that remarkable career and hear her thoughts on the opportunities and challenges facing ag and ISU moving forward. But before we get to that conversation with President Wintersteen, let's talk farm economics with Matt Erickson. Matt's a senior analyst for Terrian, which is a team of leading economists formed by Farm Credit Services of America and 3 other leading farm credit associations. Spokesman editor Tom Block had a chance to catch up with Matt earlier this fall.
Matt, thanks for taking a few minutes to join me. First, let's start off with a big picture on the macroeconomy. What's going on in the larger U.S. economy? There's a lot of conflicting signals out there between inflation, consumer sentiment, things like that. So just give us a broad picture of that.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when we think about the U.S. economy, the first topic we got to talk about is U.S. GDP, and that's gross domestic product or overall economic growth. And for the most part, we saw, some of the impact of tariffs in the first and second quarters within the GDP report. But for the third quarter, when I look at some of the data from the Atlanta Fed, the expectation or forecasts are about 3.9%, which is still relatively strong. And what's driving that is the overall U.S. consumer. The consumer just continues to spend and remains resilient in that nature. And so, one, I think wages are still above inflation. Consumers are still willing to spend, and that's really driving overall GDP growth. But when we take a look at how the consumer feels about their overall financial situation, and you get into some of that sentiment data, it's relatively low. And when you look at the current data, that score is about 55. And it's the 7th lowest monthly total dating back to 1978. But you also have an economy with inflation hovering around 3%, which is moderate, I would say. You've got a labor market that's still around 4.3% unemployment. And you look at when consumer sentiment has been this low, you've had much more higher levels of inflation and unemployment in the economy. So again, I think affordability and I think concerns about the labor market here moving forward are really weighing down on U.S. consumers.
We've had a lot of federal policy. What the Fed is doing with interest rates, tariffs, how are all of those things impacting the overall economy and the ag economy specifically?
Sure. When we think about the decisions that the Fed has to make about interest rate policy, it's more easy to say what their job is because it's a dual mandate. It's price stability and maximum employment. But in action, it's one of the most difficult jobs to do. And so, when we think about what the Fed's doing right now in reducing rates, I think the balance of risk is now more weighted towards the labor market and getting ahead of the labor market to make sure that we don't have additional layoffs, that the labor market stays healthy. And so I think that right now is the reason why the Fed is starting to reduce rates. I do think we have to keep in mind here that we've got a lot of tailwinds on the price stability side, and we still have a ways to go, in my mind, even though we're still at 3% inflation, in order for us to get to 2%. So we call that sticky inflation in a sense where it's going to take maybe some time for us to get down to that 2% level.
And where we've really seen some of the consumer challenges is at the grocery store, where that would impact agriculture a little bit. Prices have just sort of skyrocketed and seeing a lot of pain that way.
They have. And when we think about 2026, whether it's agriculture and food, I think agriculture policy is going to be food policy in 2026. And I think affordability, when we think about consumer sentiment, is going to be a major topic in 2026. You think about key staples such as ground beef, you think about chicken, eggs. We've seen year-over-year price increases. We've seen increases over the past 5 years. This will be an opportunity where farmers need to think about weighing in if there's a policy that doesn't make sense, or even if there's a policy that does make sense. And so when we think about inflation, oftentimes we hear the headline number, which is year over year. And that's that 3% overall CPI number that we're currently in. But we don't oftentimes look at the cumulative effects of inflation. And the data that suggests over the past 5 years, basically since 2021, was we've seen food prices increase over 25%. That's total food prices since 2021. Energy prices or gasoline prices, even though they have come down, they are above 2021 levels. Shelter as well is about 27% increase since 2021. So again, when you're a consumer and you look at all these increased costs, even though wages are exceeding inflation, it's not a sustainable path here moving forward where you do have wages kind of subsiding and inflation remaining sticky.
Now, you're an economist, not a political scientist, but federal policy and just information coming out from the administration is having a big impact. Tariffs and things can kind of change day by day in that regard. So where are we at? Tariffs seem like they're going to be around a while. And what impact will that have on some of the factors that are important to farmers, such as fertilizer, other things like that?
Yeah, sure. I think when we look at tariffs and what's going on there, one, I think it's always going to be a moving target. And I think when we think about the one that's in the limelight right now, it's obviously soybeans and what China's doing there. And you've got a commodity, a rather big commodity in the Midwest that is losing about 25% of their balance sheet with regard to exports to China. So that is a big impact there. You know, even though it is an impact on the future side of things, basis, if I look at basis up in North Dakota and even in the higher Great Plains states, basis is relatively wide. So again, that has a hindrance on farmers. You think about inputs, we do import a lot of fertilizer for our farmers. So again, you know, that could have an impact with regard to input costs. You know, I think when we think about the overall dynamic of trade and overall flows, it's just going to be a moving target with this thing. But I always say that tariffs are not a zero-sum game. At the end of the day, someone has to pay for those tariffs. And again, I think we're still seeing, you know, kind of this shakeout here in the supply chain for the overall U.S. economy.
And you mentioned soybeans in particular, as you said, a big crop here in Iowa. Is there some rebalancing of if China buys from Brazil, some other markets will come open, but what's the impact of that? How much can we ship and how much more difficult is it to, instead of one big market, you have to go to multiple smaller markets?
Yeah, when you look at cumulative sales of U.S. soybeans, and again, thinking about this over the past 10 years, one, you know, if you go back to, let's say, marketing year 16, 17 to where we are today, cumulative sales are relatively low, even back during the first Trump 1.0 trade war with China. So again, it's not the fact of we've got less countries buying U.S. soybeans compared to where we were back during the first Trump administration. I think there's a lot of optimism on the soybean crush side, on the domestic side of things. And so making sure we've got growing and an able crush industry here in the U.S., I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I know for livestock, on the livestock side of things, having the opportunity to have a little bit cheaper soybean meal is often a good thing for feed costs. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But again, you know, making sure that we've got certainty in some of these policies like 45Z and some of those things on the energy side are really paramount for us to get some certainty there.
And you mentioned livestock, somewhat of a positive point. Right now in Iowa is very lucky. We're about 50-50 on crops and livestock in Iowa. But as we've seen, especially in 2024, a lot of layoffs in the ag manufacturing sector. So how is agriculture impacting the overall economy in Iowa and the Midwest? Is it being a drag on the economy, or is it just sort of neutral, or where are we at?
Well, I think for agriculture, one, we're in a very cyclical business. And we think about the last commodity downturn, you know, that was kind of those years between 2015 leading up to the pandemic. And when we think about this go around, I firmly believe the first commodity that was impacted by this downturn was hogs. You know, you think about 2023, you think about some of those losses that hog producers, which there's a lot in Iowa, that 2023 was a red year. I mean, farmers were not making profits in 2023. They were losing quite a bit of money. The fact of the matter was you had just expensive corn, you had expensive soybeans, and feed costs were relatively heightened. So 2023 occurred, and then all of a sudden, then the commodity downturn happened with traditional row crops, corn, soybeans, and others as well. And so I do think we're kind of in this, you know, typical kind of ag cycle. I think there's a difference, though. I think the difference between 2015 and 2019 or 2020 per se is on the macro side of things. You know, you think about dating back to 2015, where were interest rates? I mean, you were dealing with 3.25% prime. Now today, you were dealing with 6.5%, 7% prime. Back in 2015 through 2020, you had a relatively weak dollar. Last year, we had a strong dollar. It has weakened here in 2025. And so a weaker dollar helped our exports on the demand side, where last year, when we started this commodity downturn for traditional row crops, it was a relatively strong dollar. And so I think the macro side of things is really influencing a lot of kind of the margin squeeze that we're seeing here for this downturn.
I think I sat on so many ag financial meetings in that period 4 or 5 years ago where the interest rates can't stay at zero forever.
Yeah.
And they did for a longer time than we thought. But let's flip to that input side kind of for agriculture and how that is looking here over maybe the near term for farmers with interest rates, fertilizer costs, and all these inputs which have remained sticky despite lower crop prices for farmers.
Yeah. I think if there's positive kind of in this message, you look at the corn balance sheet, and corn balance sheet exports are doing really, really good. So I think looking at that demand side on the corn balance sheet, it's still positive. The fact of the matter is we grew 98 million acres this year, and we're going to have a relatively historic strong crop for the 25-26 growing season. So the fact is you've got supply outpacing demand, which again, we think about fundamental economics, that lowers price, right? And so, I think that on itself is kind of the picture there for corn. I would also say for producers as well, you look at the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed here this year, and you had a lot of really good positive policies for agriculture. You have higher reference prices for the price loss coverage program. Congress added more investments into the farm safety net, which are positives for agriculture. You think about what they did with regard to crop insurance premium subsidies, those were increased a little bit. So I think the farm safety net was stronger from the investments made in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And so again, when we talk about, this margin squeeze, I do think there was some positive momentum with One Big Beautiful Bill to add those investments for risk management.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of good things in there as far as the taxes and
absolutely.
And the, as you mentioned, ARC PLC and some improvements with that. Just to wrap up here, Matt, so what signals are you watching here for 2026 and what can farmers kind of keep their eyes on?
Yeah, well, 2026, there's obviously a big midterm. And again, it's always kind of like every year we kind of talk about, politics and everything like that. But I think 2026 will be a big midterm year. You've got a House, which has got a very slim majority on the Republican side. The Senate, there's a little bit more, buffer there for Republicans. But, I think when we think about 2026, I think affordability is going to be a big topic for consumers. I think consumer sentiment is going to be one that's going to be watched very heavily in this case. And so from an agriculture standpoint, what happens with things like food policy, what policies are going to be made out there to get prices lower. I think agriculture, farmers and ranchers need to lean in on some of those messages in order to be proactive, to make sure that we have sound policy. Again, I worked in DC for 20 years, and the best policy that gets put into place is when farmers and ranchers tell Congress and the administration what to do. And so again, I think advocacy is going to be important to make sure that we've got sound agriculture policy driven from the grassroots, not from those that are not from the grassroots.
Okay, Matt. Well, thank you for your time. Very interesting and always changing, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks, Matt. Our podcast listeners know that we're big on tapping into economic expertise from a variety of sources, whether it's our Farm Bureau economic experts or other folks who are also looking at the economic conditions facing farmers and U.S. consumers, like Matt. If you'd like to hear more from Matt, we've included a link to his recent research and his contact information down in the notes for this podcast episode. Next up, our conversation with the 16th president of Iowa State University, Wendy Wintersteen. Last week, Spokesman editor Tom Block traveled to Ames to hear President Wintersteen's reflections on agriculture and the university as she hands off the baton to David Cook, an ISU alum who most recently served as the president of North Dakota State University and will take over as the president of Iowa State University early next year.
President Wintersteen, thank you for joining us. You have had a remarkable career over 40 years associated with Iowa State, beginning in extension and then through faculty, dean of the College of Ag, and ultimately becoming Iowa State's 16th president. So talk about that journey and how your experiences in agriculture helped shape your leadership philosophy.
Well, it has for me been an incredible journey. I think back to those early years working with Extension, and it really set the stage for me because I learned from some of the best Extension professionals in the field. Some of your readers will remember these names: Reggie Voss, Garen Benson, really legends when it came to Extension. And what they taught me, along with other individuals that worked in the field, was that it was a two-way street, that we learned as much from farmers as we brought to them from our faculty researchers on campus. Being willing to listen to farmers taught us what we needed to take back to the scientists on campus. So learning to listen was a skill that I learned from Extension, and it served me well throughout all my years in administration as dean and now as president. So Extension, an invaluable experience for me as a young person, and then certainly those skills set me up well for my role as president.
And we continue to rely on Extension. You keep bringing great people in, and Iowa State has long been a leader in ag research and outreach. What do you think are some of the university's most important contributions to farmers and rural communities during your tenure?
Well, there have been so many important contributions from the university to farmers, and we can think most recently about some of the important contributions just through our veterinary diagnostic laboratory, something that the Farm Bureau has supported as we think about the new facilities that we have down at the College of Veterinary Medicine, but just the ability to diagnose diseases to protect our livestock and poultry industries in this state is critically important. So whatever those diseases might be, the early warning system that we have through the veterinary diagnostic lab is critically important. So that's one area that we are very important to the state in. Another area is the long-term investment in what we do in biorenewables. So I remember going back to 2006 and the work that we've done with Professor Robert Brown in biorenewables. The establishment of the BioCentury Research Farm was really a new concept, that we would look at bioprocessing, biomanufacturing at one of our farms, the agronomy farm. And then just last week, we did a new ribbon cutting out there for a bio-made processing chain. And that was really exciting. A state investment of $10 million, more investment from BioMade, a total investment of $40 million to really establish a new bioprocessing chain to allow companies to come in there, startups to come in there and think about how we can further have new and different bioprocessing to benefit corn and soybean farmers in this continued focus on biorenewables. So here's the BioCentury Research Farm, 2006, and now being renovated for new opportunities in 2025. And all along the way, Iowa Farm Bureau was there with the university thinking, what's the future opportunities? So there's another great example of an investment in science, an investment in research, an investment in the partnership that we can do together.
Yeah, there really has been a lot of value. You talk about the vet diagnostic lab, which our members, our livestock farmers, rely on, and then the value-added part of the BioCentury Research Farm. And money's at a premium, so how have those universities' partnerships with organizations like Farm Bureau and other public-private partnerships benefited ISU's ag programs?
The partnerships, one, benefit us because, back to my first comment, Tom, is that if we aren't listening to farmers, then how could we possibly know where our focus should be in our research programs? We at the land-grant university want to serve farmers in our rural communities, and so we have to listen. It has to be a two-way street so that we know we are hearing what the pull is. Where should the focus be in our research? So how do we maintain our relevancy to Iowa? We maintain that relevancy by listening, by developing a true partnership. Our faculty can be working on many, many different things, but by being engaged with the Farm Bureau, by being engaged with our other partners in the commodity organizations, then we really do know and hear where the need is. So it might be a disease in livestock and poultry. It might be a disease in corn. It might be the same old issues that we continue to struggle with soybean cyst nematode. It might be a new insect that's coming into the state. But if we're listening and working hand in hand, then we continue to make a difference for Iowa farmers.
And there's your entomology background coming out.
I had to mention insects.
Yes.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't. And then I'm just going to jump in and say that back in 2014, I was so pleased when Iowa Farm Bureau stood up and said that they'd be part of the monarch conservation consortium and say that all over the state, farmers have land that is not productive for corn and soybean production or other crops. And they said that they would help farmers understand that having land for monarch conservation was a good thing, and that we could, in fact, in the heart of the reproductive zone for monarch butterflies, that we could conserve them. And we have done more, I believe, than any other state in the United States to conserve the monarch butterfly, and that's important. It's important for kids. It's important for just the fact that we want to maintain that important migration. So I thank the Iowa Farm Bureau for doing that.
And I remember that time, and farmers really did take up that mission and were able to take little patches of land that were not being used for production and benefit. And they have that mentality to be helpful for the environment as well as raise crops.
Exactly. And whenever they did that for monarchs, it was good for bees and for any insect. So really a positive step forward. And Tom, I'll tell you that I had farmers sending me photos of all sorts of larvae, the immature stage of the monarch butterfly, saying, is this the monarch larvae? And I'd say, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it was a lot of fun. And again, I just want to say, we really have done more in Iowa than many, many other states. And I would say more than any other state.
Now, you were Dean of the College of Ag and Life Sciences during the formation of Iowa's nutrient reduction strategy, another environmental research concept. So what role do you see the university has played in this water quality research and the improvements that have been achieved since the strategy was adopted?
Well, Iowa State has played a critically important role, and I'm just going to take a moment and say that was really a partnership between Iowa State University, Iowa Department of Agriculture, and Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and just say bless Secretary Bill Northey and the leadership he played at that time. And certainly Mike Naig has continued on in that important role. But Iowa State University and its research, again, leading the nation in our research for this in terms of the work we've done on bioreactors, edge of field, saturated buffers, cover crops. It's been tremendous amount of research that has been done, and I could reel off a name of a half a dozen faculty leading the nation in the research. But again, the research wouldn't have very much relevancy if they weren't working hand in hand with farmers. Tremendous work has been done. And not just the work on preventive strategies, but the work to understand this complex problem. And I would say throughout Iowa, most Iowans do not understand how complex this issue is. And Dr. Castellano has really done work that has made a difference in the understanding of what is actually happening here. Farmers might apply 120 pounds of nitrogen to a field, but our rich soils have already 10,000 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And an understanding of that, because of Mike Castellano's work, has helped change the conversation. That while we have good practices that farmers can apply due to a lot of the research done by farmers and because of the really basic research done by our faculty here, we have to continue to help everyone understand the issue and help our farmers implement these practices. So we played a big role. And then, of course, there's the nitrogen initiative through Secretary Neg and our faculty. And boy, hundreds and hundreds of trials on farmers' land every year that help refine the nitrogen recommendations. And based looking at individual genetics, weather patterns, soil type, and that's really also making a difference. So Iowa State plays an important role here. We're engaged, working with farmers, helping the public understand the issue.
And you know this as a scientist yourself, no 2 years are ever alike. And Dr. Castellano, you're trying to just do the best you can with the information you have and improve and make progress every year.
Exactly. Farmers have a big job. They have to deal with changing weather, they have to deal with changing economics, and so it is a very difficult job to manage. And I can't overstate the complexity of the issue. And that's something that we all have to understand and be able to have conversations about.
Now, you've mentioned a few of the projects that have happened over Iowa State just in the past 20 years since the turn of the century, but we are living in a time of incredible advancements in agriculture through precision ag, sustainability, as we've mentioned, the bioeconomy research. Which emerging technologies or research areas excite you most?
Well, there are many, but I do have to say digital and precision agriculture. It is just incredible. And Dr. Matt Darr and his team here, and which is big, but you think about who might be the point person in this area, and you have to say Matt Darr. Digital innovative programs down at the research park. He's doing a tremendous job. And I don't think many people know the number of patents that he and his team have and the number of patents that are actually in equipment that farmers buy today. And so that shows another type of partnership that exists here at Iowa State as we work with companies that sell products, sell equipment to farmers. So patents that Matt Darr has developed that are actually in the equipment that farmers buy. So sprayer technology would be one example. So anymore, the ability to target actually in the field specific weeds, that is really making a difference. Precision technology in the field. When I started my career back in 1979, who would have thought that you can do precision spraying and really reduce the amount of herbicide that you're applying per acre? The world has changed with precision, digital application of pesticides. It's just a new world. And it's not just sprayer technology, but it's in planters, it's in combines, it's everywhere you look. And what's great about Matt Darr is his work with extension. So we're taking basic research, working with companies, and then working with extension to deliver that information to farmers. So Matt does Planter University, for example. And Tom, I'll tell you, I was never surprised in my life when I got a thank you letter from a farmer because the farmer had attended Planter University. Now, can you imagine a farmer writing the president to thank the president for the extension program on Planter University? I don't think that's ever happened before, at least not in recent times.
No, probably not. And that speaks to your connection to agriculture, which we've always appreciated. And Iowa State certainly holds true to its roots as a land-grant university, but it has also evolved to meet the needs of modern agriculture through things like Planter University and taking the research to the farmers. So talk about that, how the university has evolved in its mission and where you see it heading next.
The university evolves every day. We evolve in our teaching programs, how we're conducting research, and certainly in extension. And I just think it's the way of doing business. So whether you're a university or you're a business in the private sector, you have to constantly be evolving to the changes that are occurring out there. And just what we've talked about already, I think shows how the university is changing and adapting to how we reach out and connect with farmers, and we're going to keep doing that. It's just going to be a continual process of how we connect and how we maintain our relevancy as a land-grant university.
And the lifeblood of Iowa State and any university is the students. And you've often spoken about the importance of preparing that next generation of agricultural leaders. So what skills or mindsets do you think will define the next wave of ag professionals?
I really believe, as we think about our next generation of graduates from the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, that they really need to be prepared to know about using their creativity. And that's been something that's really been one of my main goals as president, and that is innovation and entrepreneurship. And it's all based in using your creativity. We know that technology is going to continue to advance very rapidly. And if you aren't prepared to be able to respond, to be able to use your creativity, to be able to understand innovation, then you won't be able to adapt. So here at Iowa State University, we've been lifting up opportunities for students to learn about innovation and entrepreneurship, because that's how you can adapt to a world with rapidly changing innovation, rapidly changing technologies. So we're so proud of what we've done, because now every semester there's about 8,000 students that take some course related to innovation and entrepreneurship, and we think that's how students can be prepared. It's not always about having them have a startup when they leave or a startup while they're still here, but it's about preparing them to have an innovative mindset when they go to take their first job, because that means they'll be prepared. They'll be prepared for whatever change is going to occur, whatever new job they may take after their first job. That's how we prepare students at Iowa State University. And I think it makes a difference.
We've seen that through the Ag Innovation Center, the Entrepreneurship Center.
Right.
I think I just got a press release that Iowa State made a national ranking in entrepreneurs across the university. So that's very exciting.
Well, right. And so we just learned that we're number 9 in the Princeton Review for entrepreneurship and innovation. And that's a big deal. We're competing with the schools that are typically ranked very high in this area. So there's Iowa State University on the national stage. So we're proud of the work we're doing in this area.
Looking back again across your career, you talk about starting in the 1970s. Agriculture, I'm sure at that time, was even more a male-dominated industry, but it's always been traditionally male-dominated. But we've seen that change, and women now outnumber men in the ISU College of Ag and Life Sciences. So what would your advice be to young people, especially women, exploring careers in agriculture and trying to find their place?
Well, it's what I always tell everyone: merit matters. Those that are willing to bring their best selves to work, that have the skills that are needed, that are willing to work hard. You know, I like to tell this story about when I was first hired. It happened to me Memorial Day weekend, and I decided that I needed to go out there and be scouting my cornfields, because we knew there was going to be a black cutworm outbreak, but we didn't know how bad it was going to be. And every field I went to on that Memorial Day weekend was infested with black cutworms. Now, most people don't know what a black cutworm is anymore because we've got BT corn. But I interrupted so many Memorial Day picnics to tell farmers that they had black cutworms in their fields and that they needed to be out there doing something. And so I think working hard cannot be overstated. So you got to know what you're doing. You've got to be willing to have the right attitude, but working hard is still the important thing for everybody to know and remember. Whether you're a woman or a man, you got to show up. And that's one of the lessons that I learned in Extension. And what I didn't do that to try to show off. I just knew that there was going to be a problem and I might as well get my work week started, and it didn't matter that it was a holiday. And I got these nice letters in my file, and I haven't gone over to look, but I bet those letters are still there. And so that's what matters.
Yeah, in agriculture, you need to be out there when it's happening.
Right.
So a day can make a big difference.
And with black cutworms at that time, it made a huge difference. And so that's what we should tell young people.
Very interesting story. As you look back on your presidency, what are you proudest of in the College of Agriculture and across the university as a whole? And what personal moments stand out as especially meaningful?
I am so proud of our students. And I say this all the time, Tom. During my presidency, little more than 58,000 students will have graduated. And I think about what their lives are going to be like. I know that they will go out and accomplish great things. And I think about what a difference they're going to make in the world. And it's going to be great for them. They'll have wonderful livelihoods. They'll make a difference in the world. And they'll come back to Iowa State University and they will show up and they will thank Iowa State University. We had this couple, Joyce and Turk Turkelson. They came back and Turk stood up at the ribbon cutting for a building they funded here on campus. And Turk said, Iowa State made him. And they gave us $42 million, Tom, to build the industrial engineering building because he said Iowa State made him. And his wife, Joyce, was also a graduate. And she and Turk made this company that allowed them to give us $42 million. Can you imagine? I couldn't imagine. No. I love Joyce and Turk because they worked hard. They had a degree that made the difference for them, and they wanted to help the next generation of students. So I know our students will go out and have great lives, and Iowa State gave them the foundation to do that. It's just incredible. What makes me proud is when I walk out of this building around commencement, and I just can't believe the number of people that stop me and they tell me their story. And then I get choked up because the stories are so incredible. And one day I walked out here and there was a man taking a picture with his son. And he had his family with him and there were other children. And the man came up and he said, "Will you take a picture with my son?" And I said, "Of course I'll take a picture with your son." And so I took the picture with his son, and he had graduated in engineering, and they were standing over here so that Marston was in the background. And he goes, "We're from Illinois, and my son came over here the fall of 2020. It was in the middle of COVID, really." Mm-hmm. And he goes, "We didn't even come with him. We just sent him here. And it was great engineering school, and we just sent him here. And he got a great education. He's got a job with the Iowa DOT. He's the first child in our family to go to school, and he had a great experience." And then the father started crying and just couldn't believe how well his son had done here. And then the father wanted a photo with me. But that happens to me all the time, Tom. So I get to be the face of Iowa State.
Yeah, that really speaks to, again, your presidency, but the connection that Iowa State has. We haven't talked much about COVID, but the whole transition for every student, I had a daughter who was in college during that time, and just navigating through that had to be something you were learning as you go. But
right, and we did it right, Tom. We were back in school the fall of 2020. We did it safely. There were terrible things that happened during COVID. Mm-hmm. People passed away. It was terrible. But at Iowa State, we did it right. Our students were protected. We didn't have anybody die. And we were back in school in the fall of 2020. I had students come up and thank me for getting them back in the classroom. It was a big deal to me.
Yeah, very much so. And that science-based approach, and I know the vet lab had a big role.
Nobody knows this. It's like the biggest kept secret. The state hygienic lab could process 100 samples a day. But then Roger Main at the veterinary diagnostic lab, one weekend, shortly after we shut down, he took equipment, all the reagents, his know-how, over to the state hygienic lab, and he taught them how to process COVID samples. And so they went from 100 samples a day to 2,000 samples. Can you imagine? He saved Iowa, because otherwise, how would we process all the samples?
Yeah, we would not have had that information. So a very critical role. And maybe you've talked a lot about some personal moments with commencement, so maybe that encompasses it. But on a personal note, is there a favorite ISU tradition or activity that really captures what this university means to you?
There are just so many, Tom. And so here's what I'll say. Every fall we welcome students to Iowa State University. It's about 5,000 freshmen come to Iowa State University, and we have a couple of events. We have Cyclone Welcome Weekend and Destination Iowa State. And you go over to Hilton Coliseum and you stand on the stage and you say, "Welcome to Iowa State." It's a big moment. We love welcoming these students to Iowa State. It's really special.
Very good. Your successor was named recently, and he is an ISU alum. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to him, but what advice would you give to him as he takes on the role of president?
We have the perfect president for Iowa State University in David Cook. I am so pleased with his selection. And my advice to him will be to be engaged with the students. He will love the opportunity. He will do a wonderful job.
As we come towards the end of our conversation here, what challenges remain ahead for Iowa and U.S. agriculture that you hope future leaders will address?
I hope that everybody recognizes that for agriculture to be able to continue to advance, agricultural research needs to be funded. It's been a long-standing issue. Federally, the USDA has a very small budget for research. And agricultural research receives some funding from the National Science Foundation, but not as much as it should. And there just needs to be a bigger budget for research for agriculture. Agriculture faces a lot of issues, and research can be the solution. And while companies invest, they invest in lots of areas. They invest in health, they invest in many engineering issues. But if the nation doesn't invest in agricultural research, it will hurt farmers. And I believe that farmers know that. And so I say we should all advocate for investment in research for the benefit of farmers, because back to our water quality issue, that's how we've been able to help address and help farmers is through the research of our faculty.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the way through the food chain. I heard you on stage at the World Food Prize in Des Moines last month discuss this with the CEO of Cargill, talking about the research investment that needs to happen and just the path we're heading on and challenges that we can solve, but we need to be committed to doing so.
That's right.
Finally, last question. What are your plans after retirement? How will you stay connected with the university and potentially agriculture?
Robert and I, my husband and I, are going to stay in Iowa. We love Iowa. We've been here 46 years. And so how could we leave Iowa? But we're going to stay out of the new president's way. You know, we've got to give him all the space in the world. And, you know, we like to joke that we can't be the old pastor sitting in the back pew. And so we're going to give the president his space, and we're going to think about what our opportunities can be, but we'll be here in Iowa.
Congratulations on an incredible career, President Wintersteen. On behalf of those of us who work in agriculture and our strong contingent of Farm Bureau members who bleed cardinal and gold, thank you for your work on behalf of ISU, agriculture, and our entire state. That's all for this edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us again in 2 weeks on December 8th, 9th, and 10th when we'll feature a special 3-part podcast series with 3 young Iowa farm leaders. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to The Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to The Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.